From Rhythm and Light in Chicago, I'm Steve Vordower, and welcome to Rhythm of Life. Today on the show, host Bob Hercules speaks with the acclaimed documentary filmmaker Steve James, whose first film, Hoop Dreams, made an indelible mark on the cultural and sociological landscape in the U.S. This film won every major critics award in 1994, as well as a Peabody, and picked up many more accolades along the way. James also directed Abacus, Small Enough to Jail, that was nominated for an Academy Award and tells the story of a small financial institution that was the only company criminally indicted in the wake of the United States 2008 mortgage crisis. He also teamed up with writer Alex Kotlowitz on The Interrupters, a film that brought us a remarkably intimate and fiercely honest portrayal of ex-gang members that transitioned to interrupting conflicts to stop gang violence in Chicago. His laundry list of vital and consequential films has brought us incredible insight into the world around us, and we are thrilled to welcome him to the show.
Well, Steve James, thank you for coming on the show today. Great to have a chance to talk to you about your life and your career and your films. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Before I start into the substance of the interview, I have to ask you how you're faring under the quarantine.
I tend to work at home. Right. When I'm not shooting, I'm virtually always home. I don't come into Cartemquin except if, for edit meetings and such. And if I'm cutting, which I often am, I'm cutting at home. So this isn't that different for me. What's different is my wife is now home doing her job from home and seeing how little I get done each day. I can no longer lie to her about having had a really productive day. But I miss seeing people and I miss seeing our kids. We're doing a lot of Zooming. And I think that for the first part of the pandemic, I paid way too much attention to everything that was happening. And
yeah,
I finally kind of stopped doing that. I was obsessing with it. And I've been a lot happier and more productive since then.
I think that's a common issue that I've heard a lot of people talk about. You finally have to cut some of it off because otherwise their anxiety level just increases. And yeah, but you're obviously not able to shoot films or anything like that right now. So are you? We've
done a little bit of shooting. We're working on a postscript for City So Real that's not a whole episode, but that just sort of brings you up to date. But okay. I'm mostly doing that by internet, talking to people, and we're doing a minimal amount of shooting because we don't have the budget for it and we don't want to risk it.
Yeah, understood. Well, speaking of City So Real, this is your latest project. It's a 4-part series about your favorite city, Chicago. And I got a chance to watch part of it at Sundance. I watched the rest of it at home. And I love the show. Of course, I'm a sucker because I love Chicago. I love and hate Chicago, shall we say. And so I think it's a fascinating show because, on one level, it's a film about the mayor's race in 2018 where we had like a zillion candidates. But obviously, it's so much more than that. It has all these beautiful moments of like a pastiche of the city. And I also thought it was just beautifully filmed by you and your son, Jackson, our former intern. I was so impressed. I mean, I was impressed with the series, but I also just want to, before I forget to say, it was just beautifully done, beautifully shot. So many great little moments that you captured, shots of Chicago in a way I'd never seen. And then, of course, you got into the nitty-gritty of the contradictions of Chicago.
The city's in shambles. We got to fix it.
Only months before the mayoral election, community leaders are demanding incumbent Rahm Emanuel resign.
What we have is more akin to a dictatorship than a democracy.
And it's also because of closing the schools, it's because of pensions.
Taxes suck. Fucking city's flat fucking broke all the time.
I'm looking for a mayoral candidate that's going to give some innovative ideas besides adding more police.
This election is one of the most important in our lifetime.
Just hope we get somebody to get this mess straightened out.
There's too many candidates, you have to narrow it down.
The woods are full of candidates.
The crowded field will play out like a barroom brawl.
That's Chicago, though,
Can Chicago win?
Welcome to Chicago.
So I just wondered how you why you wanted to do that film, that series, and what were you thinking?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks a lot. I would venture to say that most of the pretty shots were Jackson's, and so I thank you on his behalf. This is a film, although it became a series that I've wanted to do for about 20 years. When I was in grad school in Southern Illinois University, I saw this film by Chris Marker, La Jolie Mai, which is not one of his better-known films, but it really hit me because it was this portrait of Paris that he captured in the 60s, right as France was getting out of the Algerian War, and it was kind of like this kitchen sink approach to making a film. There's interviews that he conducted with people on the street. There's more sit-down interviews that he did. You see him sometimes in the corner of the frame. There's verite scenes, and there's these poetic passages that could be like Cartier-Bresson photographs of Paris. There's voiceover narration that I didn't even attempt because his is poetic and I could not possibly pull that off. But right. But you know, it just really hit me, and the thing I took away from that film was what an amazing kind of multifaceted mosaic portrait of a city, and you can kind of do anything. And it also has a very serendipitous structure. He lets things lead him to other things. So I've had it in mind for a lot of years to want to try to do something like that with Chicago, but find the right time, because he found the right time to do it. And I've thought about it off and on over the years, but when this mayoral election rolled around, coupled with the fact that the Laquan McDonald trial would be underway at the same time, I thought, gosh, and everything else going on in this city, that this was the perfect time to do this film.
Yeah, I mean, it's the momentum, of course, is provided by the mayor's race and also by the trial, but there's so many little pastiches of like the barber shop or the ex-cops gathering at another shop. It just what was your strategy to make this, to shoot this, and then to put it all together?
Yeah, well, it was funny because Zach Piper, who has worked with me a lot over the years, was and has been and was indeed in this case very much a collaborator, as was Jackson, my son. We decided kind of early on, inspired by Chris Marker, that yes, we were going to focus on the election and the trial as sort of narrative spines, but that we didn't just want to do that we wanted to let the days we go out shooting lead us where they lead us, and whatever happened in the city lead us in. And so oftentimes we'd go out in the morning with one thing in mind to shoot, with the expectation that we don't know where we're going to end the day. And
wow,
it took a while, honestly, to really embrace that, Bob. I mean, I am a filmmaker like you who looks to make discoveries. I'll always be open to where your subjects or the story leads you, of course.
Right.
But it was
yes.
It was a little different step. It was a step closer to the ledge, if you will, to kind of embrace this level of serendipity in how we went out and approached. And it took us a while to find our rhythm, but once we did, I have to say, it was a really exhilarating and exciting way to shoot.
Yeah, I mean, you're really on the cliff there. It's fascinating. One of the scenes I remember was this incredibly arcane method of challenging signatures for petitions for the mayoral candidates. And I was watching that, and I thought of Fred Wiseman, the famous, observational filmmaker that you and I both have been influenced by. So just talk to us about that scene where they're challenging signatures. I had never seen. It's like watching, how the inside story of how something gets, like how sausage gets made, basically.
On to the petition challenges.
The petition challenging process is very tedious work, but if a candidate can show that one of his or her rivals collected enough signatures that are not valid, it can keep that person from getting on the ballot.
You can object to anything you want.
Just want to make sure you never know.
Just let me know, and I will mark it on here that
not
you are
not pestering you.
No. See, that's part of this process. So
they're trying to see whether or not the voter was registered at that address or whether the signature was valid.
Line 1, the allegation is not registered at address shown. Philip is there.
Yeah.
I'm going to overrule.
So the caller is positioned between a representative of the campaign and the candidate. And they're either going to say sustained, meaning the objection has been sustained in that case, or overruled.
Line 3, the allegation is not registered. Farley, looks good to me. I'm going to overrule.
We're going to object that.
Objection noted.
Either side that doesn't like what the caller decides can say object to preserve that decision for further review.
You're really going to object to all these even when they live there?
Yes, sir.
It's frustrating for the candidates to have put all of this time and effort into gathering signatures to have objections that are totally baseless.
We live in a democracy, so they have a choice to do this right here. They may make it difficult for the candidate, but, it's a process.
It make it difficult for us.
No, well, I mean, these decisions haven't been difficult for you, though. They're clearly not good objections. The last couple that we've looked at have been... they said that he didn't live at that address, and sure enough, you pull it up on the screen, that's the name. Or maybe they took a blunderbuss and they just sprayed it all over the place, or like throwing darts at the dartboard saying, we're going to object to this one, we're going to object to that one.
Okay.
Sorry, I get a little heated.
Yeah. No, our joke, that also, the whole petition process, in a sense, it's part of the election process, obviously, but it kind of became its own thread during part of a substantial part of the series, and that was unexpected. That was unexpected, and Zach and I, in particular, and sometimes Jackson, we spent many days at the Board of Elections because it was just so interesting and fascinating. We just kind of got drawn into it, and our joke at a certain point is that if Frederick Wiseman came to town to do a film on Chicago, it would be called Board of Elections. and that would be it.
Yeah, I could see it.
We could have made a Frederick Wiseman style film all its own just from what we got at the Board of Elections. Yeah. It was a challenge to shoot in a lot of ways. How do we visualize as well as explain what's going on, because it's quite arcane and detailed. But it then became a big challenge in the editing of how do we then present this in a way that is clear to the audience but doesn't, put them to sleep.
Right.
And David Simpson, who has been a long time collaborator with me as an editor, he did a terrific job. We both edited the film, but at a certain point, he kind of took on that section to kind of clarify it better and winnow it down, and I think he did a really terrific job of making it work really well.
I mean, is part of it just simply having the patience to roll for a couple hours or something? Because sometimes I have told students, I said, sometimes you just have to roll tape for hours to get 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you talk about that. I mean, because that's been part of your process for years.
Yes, we certainly rolled a lot. It's definitely a combination of rolling a lot, but it's also, as you know, it's also thinking in the field about editing and thinking about what is it that we're going to need to make this work. And because I edit, I really think that my having edited all these years has really been a huge help to me during shooting, because I put on my editor's hat a lot of times in the field and think about what do I need in order to explain something like this or anything that's at all complicated.
Right.
And, like in this case, one of the things we decided during the editing process is that I needed to go back to Jim Allen, who is the spokesperson for the Board of Elections and quite a hilarious, interesting guy in his own right.
416,810 voters with a turnout of about 26.3%. But at this point, we're just hoping for a bigger evening rush. Yeah, anytime you set the table for all the different guests and you only have a third of them show up, you're going to be disappointed. Yeah, absolutely. We killed a lot of trees for nothing.
Between 4 to 6 p.m., we're told that there was a larger turnout than they had expected. So now we are sitting at about 34% voter turnout. We have Jim Allen here with us from the Board of Elections. So, Jim, what happened?
Well, I think the word got out that there was an election today, and there was a little bit of social shaming that we saw on the media. Elections are like children. Each one is different.
And get him to kind of take us through the nitty-gritty of the challenge process. He had already done it when we first shot, but I realized in post that it needed more clarity. And so we went back and got him to do that. And that was a real key part of then bringing everything that we shot into clarity.
It can be a little confusing because when you hear sustained, that means that the objector's complaint was found valid. That's a victory for the objector. And what the candidate wants to hear is the word overruled, meaning there's no validity to that objection.
Right. I suppose there are times when you're shooting and then you become the editor later that you might occasionally be frustrated with yourself.
Yes. And there've been many times in recent years, because I'm shooting more and more these days, there've been many times in recent years where I'm getting angry at something shot and then suddenly realize it was something I shot. And then my anger kind of goes away a little bit.
Well, I wanted to when I was looking at a lot of your films over the past few weeks, getting ready for this interview.
You poor guy.
No, I really enjoyed it. The issue of race in America is, I would say, the predominant theme of your films. Not all of them, but most of them. And I'm just wondering, was this a conscious decision or did it evolve organically because it is such a huge issue in America and the world?
Yeah, I think that interest goes way back to growing up for me, because I grew up in Hampton, Virginia, which is down on the Chesapeake Bay. The town I grew up in was probably 40% African American and 60% white. There was not many other ethnic groups there, but those two. And the high school I went to was closer to 50-50, a public school. And I think in part because I played basketball, and I was one of the few white guys on the basketball team in my high school, and because my dad's business, he had a carpeting and floor tile business. It was located in what was often referred to as the dicey part of town, which meant the black part of town. I didn't live around black people, but I had very consistent and regular interaction and encounter with black people in my hometown, and it really kind of threw into sharp relief fairly early on that life was really different for me and for them. And I think I carried that forward, and when I decided I didn't want to just be a dumb jock at a certain point in college, and then when I fell in love with film, I think I just gravitated to race as something that I really wanted to explore, because I felt so unsettled and unfinished in how I felt and how I had experienced it growing up. I grew up in a community where I heard the N-word, maybe not daily, but I heard it an awful lot.
Yeah.
And yet I was playing on a basketball team where there were only 2 white guys on the team. I have such fond memories of that experience and the camaraderie that we had on that team. And so I would come home to a place that was incredibly racist, not my personal home. My parents did not use that word.
Right. The community.
Yeah. I lived in a redneck part of town, basically. So I just had a very, and I think so, in some ways, to make sense of all this, I have been trying to make sense of it ever since as a filmmaker. That and the other piece of it, I think, was kind of the American dream. My dad was a small businessman who had great aspirations to be a big success, and he did perfectly fine, but never measured up to the level of success that he had dreamed of and hoped of. And so I think that also is a fascination, and I think it's the combination of the sort of pursuit of the American dream along with race that kind of is embedded in a lot of my work.
That's interesting. You, of course, you made a film somewhat autobiographical about the trial of Allen Iverson, who grew up in the same town in Hampton. And when you were working on that film, had you started by intending to put your own story into the film, or was that a later thought, or how did that evolve?
Yeah, Bob, I thought Allen Iverson's not interesting enough on his own.
Not at all.
No, I mean, he's kind of not a very interesting guy, really. And I thought, I should be part of this. No.
Absolutely.
That's not how it happened. What happened is that ESPN came and they did with a number of filmmakers. They reached out to a number of filmmakers who had done sports films and said, we're doing this series. Are you interested in being a part of it? And if you are, think of a story that's happened in the last 30 years that you feel hasn't been told and that somehow really resonates with you. And I immediately thought of this because this whole thing happened when I was finishing Hoop Dreams here in Chicago. This whole trial that Allen Iverson went through as a high schooler that turned into a racial bowling alley brawl.
Right. This is like in the early 90s?
Yeah, this was I was editing Hoop Dreams. So it was around 93. I was editing Hoop Dreams when this happened. And I remember thinking at the time, I should be there making a film about this. But, I kind of had my hands full and no money. And so I didn't do it. And so when this opportunity came around, I went in and I pitched it to the ESPN guys. And they said, yeah, it's a good story, but, we feel like the network covered it back then pretty thoroughly. I don't know. I don't know if it's a story that people don't already kind of know if you're a basketball fan. And I said, well, having grown up there, you don't know it. And the more I talked about having grown up there and what I perceived of my hometown, then they warmed to the idea and they said, well, the way to do this, we think, would be is if you are part of this story, is if your story becomes part of it, then it brings a perspective to it that we have definitely not seen. And so it was really kind of their idea that I do it. And so I kind of went with it.
Over the years, I've bragged that basketball star Allen Iverson grew up in my hometown.
Man, he is uncommon.
This would often spark a debate.
Iverson all the way to
At barely 6 feet tall, is Allen Iverson inch for inch the most talented player ever?
I'm supposed to be a franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice.
Or is he uncoachable?
Listen, we're talking about practice. Not a game.
And as selfish a star as there ever was.
Thinking only about himself.
Is he an icon who stayed true to himself? Or a thug in basketball shorts? I first heard about him from my dad when he was just Allen Iverson, the high school phenom. My dad first marveled at this scrawny, fearless kid's exploits on the football field, even though Iverson played for our tribal Bethel High School. By basketball season, my dad was saying he'd never seen an athlete quite like him before. The crowds would scream his childhood nickname, Bubba Chuck. Back then, no one would have believed that this celebrated, even beautiful athlete would soon racially divide the city more than anyone ever had. And that today, so many years later, he still haunts my hometown. Still makes me wonder about how far we've come.
You start injuring innocent people, you got to take responsibility for what you do.
Hampton is on trial, Virginia is on trial, and America's on trial right here.
He was given a fair and very lenient sentence for what he did.
It works. I mean, it's in a way it's very intimate because you are kind of narrating. It's part of your story as well. You're right. It's a unique perspective on a story that had been covered a lot. It's a great film.
And I got a chance to interview my mom.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was a trip. And my dad had passed away, or I would have interviewed him. Oh. But the thing about that film for me, Bob, was I'm so glad I did that film because growing up there, even though I was struck by, my encounters with race and things that I spoke about a while ago, I was just a very ignorant young guy in general.
And as we all were at that age.
And really couldn't wait to kind of get away from Hampton. You know, it was like I was determined early on, this is not where I'm going to live. And so going back and doing this film was profoundly educational for me and binded me to my, upbringing in ways that I did not anticipate was going to happen.
That's interesting. By going back and working on a film, which is a kind of investigative film in a way, but you're also kind of investigating your own roots and your own relationship to that town.
It was during making Iverson that I realized one of the reasons I made Hoop Dreams, believe it or not, many years later.
Interesting.
And that was when I had the idea to do Hoop Dreams. It grew out of an interest in race. It grew out of a love of basketball, lifelong love of basketball. It grew out of me having had the dream in my own white bread way to want to play in the NBA and not having anywhere near the talent to even get a major college scholarship, much less play in the NBA. So I knew that Hoop Dreams was grounded in all those things, right? What I didn't realize until I did the Iverson film was that one of the reasons I wanted to make Hoop Dreams was because even though I had this sort of great experience of black teammates in high school and camaraderie, and I had played pickup basketball and rec basketball with African Americans in all the years since, I realized that I didn't really have a personal relationship to those players. It was collegial. It was, snapping towels at each other in the locker room. It was making fun of each other and trash talking, but it wasn't, I'd never been in their homes. They'd never been in mine. So it kind of dawned on me that Hoop Dreams in a way was an attempt much later to understand something about their lives and their love of basketball that I had only scratched the surface of in my own personal experience.
Yeah, like a reappraisal of that experience as a kid in the relationship to the players that you played with. You jumped into Hoop Dreams. I wanted to ask you about that film. Obviously, it had a profound effect on you, but also on all of us. How did the idea for Hoop Dreams come about?
It came about when I was at Southern Illinois in grad school, and I used to play a lot at the rec center, play basketball. And there was, when I played there, I was a pretty good high school player. I played 1 year as a walk-on the fresh soft team in college, and then my career was over. But I remained very much into playing basketball for my exercise and sanity. And so I played a lot, and usually when I went to the gym, there was always, and this is pretty typical in a lot of settings, where the best players play, and then there are courts of, consistently less talent as you go down the gym. And, I was good enough to play on the good court, and so... but one day, and that court was very integrated. There were a lot of, terrific guys who, black and white, who played on that court. But one day I went to the gym on a day that I didn't normally go. I think it was like a Sunday that I just never hardly went. And I went in the gym, and for some reason that day, the court, all three courts were virtually all black players at the school. And I can, to this day, I cannot explain. It clearly was some kind of thing for the black athletes, students, players, that particular time that I happened to stumble across was kind of their time to be together and play.
Yeah.
And I didn't even play that day. I could have. They would have let me. But I sat and I just watched. And it was on all three courts, too. And that's when I had this epiphany that I want to do a film someday about what this game means to them. And I thought at the time, because it was pickup basketball in the gym, that the way to get at that would be is to do a film about pickup basketball. And then I, as I thought about it more, I thought Chicago would be a great place to do that film. And we were going to move to Chicago, and I thought this is a perfect sort of passion project for me to do. And so when my wife and I moved to Chicago all these many years ago, and I started to look into it, and I hooked up with one of my college buddies, Frederick Marks, who also played basketball in high school, and we came to Cartemquin. What we pitched to Cartemquin was basically a half-hour film, not video, film.
Mm-hmm. Shot on, you were going to shoot it on film.
We were going to shoot on film if someone gave us any money.
Right.
That was a big if. And it was going to focus on a single playground. It was going to focus on, I was going to find a playground in Chicago where there were some young dreamers, where there were some ex-players, where that court had a history. Maybe an Isaiah Thomas or a pro player had come off of that court and was a legend from that court. And do a very narrowly focused film about playground basketball and the sport of basketball in that community, which would have been a perfectly good idea.
Yeah.
It's just we didn't end up making that once we got out there. It took us in a different direction.
Right. You met the two characters you followed for years then in high school.
Yeah, it really changed with Arthur because, we went out with this guy named Big Earl Smith, who's in the film.
He's like a scout for the high school?
Yeah, so he was an insurance salesman, but in his spare time, he scouted for top flight high school programs. He scouted and interestingly enough, the guy that introduced us to Big Earl was Gene Pingatore at St. Joe's, because we approached Gene Pingatore about thinking that maybe Isaiah could be part of this film if we went to a court that Isaiah had played on.
Right. Isaiah Thomas.
Isaiah, is arguably the best player to ever come out of the city of Chicago. Okay, which is quite a claim because there's been a lot of great players.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, we met Pingatore first, and he said, I know just the guy to speak to. And he introduced us to Earl Smith and said, this guy knows every playground in the city.
I'm off to Central and the Congress Expressway, a park over there where there's some pretty talented young men.
Earl Smith works downtown as an insurance executive. On weekends, he's an unofficial talent scout for several area high schools.
This is what you call beating the bushes. This is the job of most of your freshman coaches and guys like me who played a little bit of the game, who loves trying to help young people on the road to success.
And so we went out with Earl when we started to do that initial shooting on video because we didn't have any money, and we just said, screw it, we've got to start something. I had gotten a $2,000 Illinois Arts Council fellowship that we
right, that wouldn't pay for much film stock.
No. And we met Peter Gilbert through Cartemquin. And Peter had his own gear because he was a shooter. Right. And he was a total basketball nut who also played on his high school team.
Plus, Peter had worked with Barbara Koppel, one of your heroes.
Exactly. So we went out that first week and with Earl looking and scouting for the playground that we were going to do. And it was during that time that he discovered Arthur on one of the shoots. And he was like, ooh, I love this kid. And we're like, which kid? Because we didn't see it.
Today, Earl spots Arthur Agee, who just graduated from grammar school.
Got the quickest first step I've seen in about 5 years. His first step. I will bet you a steak dinner in 4 years you'll be hearing from him. I don't even know anything about him.
But Earl, had an eye. And it was so fascinating, though, what he was doing and he said, I want to take him out to St. Joe's. And we were like, oh, wait, we know the coach there,
Yeah. Who was the guy who introduced you to
who introduced us, right? He says, yeah, I want to take him out to see Gene. And let Gene have a look at him. And we just thought, this is fascinating.
Your role today, Arthur, is to impress the coaches. Try not to be too fancy, but take the open shot when you have it. Play good defense and make good passes. The rest of it just play natural,
hoping I'm gonna go to St. Joe and play. But first, I gotta get my book straight and hopefully come out and impress the coaches.
Was it kind of scary?
Yes, it is.
So it kind of instantly became, instead of staying on a playground court and telling the story, it was going to be the story of a kid trying to leave the playground and make his dream come true.
So it started to become more expansive.
Yes.
So I take it you went with him to the school.
We got permission.
Yeah.
And Arthur went the day, I forget, I think this was Earl's idea because he was trying to impress Arthur with St. Joe's. He went the day that Pingatore had Isaiah in for the camp.
That's right. There's scenes of Isaiah in the film. And you can see it in Arthur's eyes.
And Isaiah,
worshipful eyes.
Yeah, oh my God. And Isaiah was Arthur's hero. And Isaiah was from the West Side, where Arthur was.
Right.
And grew up not far from where Arthur was living.
It was like millions of guys trying to be better than the other. But to me, I was better than all of them, except Isaiah.
So it was kind of like, honestly, the documentary gods smiled on us in a big time way to kind of create all of these interesting connections immediately. And then while we were at the camp that very day and we had our first interview with Pingatore after he'd watched Arthur play, and he says, and it's in the film, Arthur's raw, he's got talent, I can see it. He says, but I've got a kid coming in here that I think could really be something. He could be the next Isaiah Thomas. And I was like, who's that?
Right.
And he goes, he's here. He turned an ankle, so he's not playing today. And so we went and talked to William in the stands, sight unseen of him as a player, just on that. And that was the beginning of William's story.
With Isaiah, I just knew he was going to be a great one. He had that total combination of personality, confidence, talent, intelligence. I think I see it in one kid that's coming here. He flows with a smoothness and confidence and strength that you don't see in every kid. He could become a great player.
So did you settle at that point on those two to follow their story because you could have had other possibilities, or were you filming other kids at the time, or did you immediately settle on those two?
We didn't film other kids, but there were two other kids that we had looked at before the camp through Earl. One was a kid named Mickey Irvin, but then Mac Irvin, the father, through Earl, said he didn't want it because he didn't want to put the pressure on his son. And then there was another son of a kid that was connected to St. Joe's, Wordlaw was his last name, that we looked into possibly following. But his dad wasn't so sure about it. And then we met Arthur. And then when we went out to St. Joe's and met William, it was like, well, these two kids. And because we had no money, I remember thinking at the time, we don't really have any money. Maybe we'll follow both these kids, and then at some point we'll just focus on one of them and hope that one of them is an interesting story. Because honestly, we didn't see what Arthur became in terms of the story that unfolds in Hoop Dreams in terms of Arthur blossoming as a basketball player.
Right. Well, how can you know?
We didn't know, and we kind of thought, we should hedge our bets some too.
Oh, and to also focus on William just in case.
And focus on William because people are saying he is the real deal. Arthur's a raw talent, but this kid's the real deal. And I've had people over the years say, God, you must have followed a dozen kids, and then you selected those two to focus on. It's like, no, we didn't have the money to follow. We didn't even have the money to follow two kids, but we did, and they were the story.
And did you have a sense somewhere along the way that this was going to be much bigger than a smaller film about two kids in street basketball and getting recruited to a white kind of fancy high school? At what point did you realize this is much bigger than what we set out to do? This is almost a sociological observation, besides the basketball.
Well, we realized pretty quickly that it wasn't going to stay on a playground for sure. And then once we did some filming with William and then met on the very first day that we filmed with William, we met Curtis, his older brother, who was utterly fascinating to us.
I know a whole lot about basketball. I guess in so many words, I feel like I'm a pro at that in my mind.
The Trojans were led on the court all season by 6'2" sophomore guard Curtis Gaines.
When he went to college and like when Michael Jordan first came to the NBA, they would, sit around and argue over him who could play the basketball.
Curtis was named Player of the Decade at Colby Junior College, but he also developed a reputation for being uncoachable.
Curtis' idea of being real good is you don't follow the rules, you do what you want to do.
Curtis finally signed at the University of Central Florida, but he didn't get along with the coach and rarely played.
Even if he didn't play ball, it was a nice university. He could have finished school, but he couldn't handle it.
All those basketball dreams I had, they gone. All I see, all my dreams is in him now.
And then when we met Arthur's family with our first shooting at home with him, Sheila and Bo and Sweetie, his little brother.
When I get in the NBA, first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go see my mama. I'm gonna buy a house. I'm gonna go there and make sure my sister and my brother's okay. If we okay or not. Probably get my dad Cadillac Oldsmobile so he can cruise in the game. Real long.
Dominique.
He dreams about it. You look at those basketball commercials where they be advertising like these Nike shoes, and he'll tell his little small brother, Joe, that's me.
My recollection is that we fairly early on fantasized, and it was more of a fantasy. We fantasized about the possibility that we might follow this story over a period of time and just sort of check in every once in a while with them.
I don't even think about it, if you don't make it, I just, because I'm so, focused in on him making it. I just know he'll make it,
Because at one point, it's in the film, Pingatore says to Arthur and his family, he's just met this family and seen this kid play a little bit in his camp, and he says to this family, he says, if Arthur comes to St. Joe's, I can't promise he's going to be a star, I can't promise anything, but I promise that if he stays here, at the end of 4 years, I will do everything I can to help him get into college. And that was such an extraordinary promise for a kid like Arthur and this family that it certainly stuck with us. And we thought, well, maybe, gosh, is that possible? I mean, we don't have any money, but I don't know. Maybe we can, Peter's donating his camera for free. Maybe we can do something like that. But it was nowhere near the ambition that it became at all in our thinking. And I think when it really dawned on us that this was a considerably larger story was sophomore year, when Arthur was kicked out of St. Joe's and goes back to Marshall. And that turn of events really was, striking and revealing.
If he was going out there and he was playing like they had predicted him to play, he wouldn't be at Marshall. Economics wouldn't have had anything to do with him not being in St. Joe's. Somebody would have made some kind of arrangement and the kid would have still been there. He's not making it like they thought he was going to make it on the basketball court, so he's not there. Simple as that. And it doesn't take no brilliant person to figure that out.
And then when William started in his sophomore year to just open up about the pressure he felt to be a star, and that he felt from everybody, his family, his brother, everyone, that everyone was counting on him.
Make sure you look at how many shots been taken. George might shoot on 15 out of 40.
15 out of 40?
Well, I'm just saying, for instance, he's done it. But see, if you do that, you don't know about it.
Curtis tell William the most important thing is getting the ball in the basket. Curtis said the boy's good. He said he's real good. He said, but he don't listen. He said if he listened to him, he'd be better.
They always tell me, well, you should do this and you should do that. It's like everybody I know is my coach.
I remember coming home after talking to him one day on camera and Peter and I got on the phone, which we often did at nights after shooting all day. We would talk for hours on the phone.
Right.
I remember having a conversation with Peter where we were just both kind of like stunned by this kid and by his insight and his sensitivity and his awareness for such a young age. And just thinking, this kid is special. Because there's a tendency even today, but especially then, to think of really talented basketball players as guys with huge egos, dilettantes. Everyone, clears the way for them. And William was the exact opposite of all that. And yet he was immensely talented.
When I first went to St. Joe's, I really did sleep, eat, and drink basketball. That was all I did. But it became more of a job than a sport to play.
Things here have not changed since.
Coach Pingatar just had these dreams in his head.
For me, and
he just wanted me to go the same route he took Isaiah.
Western Michigan, the most steals. He played as a freshman. Not even Isaiah was a 4-year starter.
Basketball was just like he was possessed with it. It was his life. And he wanted it to be everybody else's life, too.
All-conference in the SEC, All-State on the Sun-Times, McDonald All-American nomination, MVP 1990-91 season, William Gates.
When I had some real problems, I couldn't go to none of them about it. I was having some problems with Catherine family and my family, and I said, Coach Pingatar, they family been getting on me about, I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that. And the only thing Coach Pingatar could say is, write them off. That was all he told me. I was like, what kind of advice is that?
It's an obviously incredible story that you followed for about 4 years, right?
Well, closer to 5.
Longer. 5 years, yeah.
We started before freshman year, that summer before, and then we followed them into their first year of college. We shot not a ton at college, but we shot considerably more than you see at the end of the film in that little, epilogue kind of thing. Right. We shot considerably more, but in the editing at a certain point, we just said, you know what, that's an epilogue. It's not this story. This story is fundamentally over when they leave for college.
Right. How did the success of Hoop Dreams, how did that change your life?
Well, Bob, I was really on a fast track before Hoop Dreams came out.
Clearly.
I mean, I had lots of people beating up my doors.
You had a $2,000 grant from the Illinois Arts Council.
Not everybody gets those.
No.
You know that? Hoop Dreams is the single biggest, outside of marrying Judy, who, 40 years later, we're still at it. It's the single biggest thing that happened in my life. And it changed everything. When we were making Hoop Dreams, we used to joke, as it started to seem that it was going to be longer, it went from we think it's an hour to, we think it's 90 minutes, we think it's 2 hours, to eventually, geez, I don't know, we think it's 3 hours. At a certain point, we got public television money, so it was going to be on public television. But we were shooting it on video, and I remember when the MacArthur Foundation came on board and literally saved the film financially to allow us to make the film we wanted to make. Before we got the grant, the guy at MacArthur, Woody Wickham, God bless him, he said to me, he said, he had seen stuff, and he said, is this a film that could play in theaters? I said, no. We shot this on video. It's going to be long. No way. Because at that time, the only documentaries that played theatrically were shot on film.
Right. And there were very few of them.
And there were very few of them, and none of them were 3 hours long, I don't think.
Right.
Maybe Max Ophuls,
Holocaust film.
Well, no, not Shoah. Sar in the Pity. But if it played theatrically, it played in New York, and that was it.
And in Paris.
Yeah, in Paris. So, our joke that wasn't so funny was, we're going to finish this thing, and public television's going to put it on at like 11 o'clock at night because. Right. And then we're going to run into people the next day, and they're going to go, because this is before streaming. Right, and DVR. We're going to run into people the next day and go, oh, your thing was on last night, wasn't it? Geez, I forgot about it. And that's it. It's over.
And it's ephemeral at that point. It's runs on PBS once, and maybe next year one more time, and that's it.
Yeah, it's on the electromagnetic waves headed to Pluto at that point. And that's the end. And that, this would have been 7.5 years roughly of work. Yeah. And it's over. And so we got an inkling that it might be a little different when we had a gathering of people that the MacArthur Foundation did when we got into Sundance. That was really great. Sundance was important then. It wasn't what it's become, but it was still quite important.
Yeah.
And we got into Sundance, so that was a good sign. And so the MacArthur Foundation organized a gathering of key people and outreach people and people with experience in theatrical film and all this stuff to have a powwow about what to do with this thing. And people from public television came to that. And at that point, it became clear that public television was going to treat it specially, which was great. And then out of that meeting came the idea that don't rule out some kind of limited theatrical for this film. John Pearson, who attended that meeting, who I ended up making a film on some years later, he was the guru of independent cinema at that time and selling films for theatrical release. And he said, don't rule it out.
Yeah.
And so this is a long way around to answer your question. When it went to Sundance, and Siskel and Ebert talked about it when it was only playing at Sundance on their national show that was the most powerful film criticism show, in America.
One of the few, maybe the only.
Yeah, probably the only. And they were arguably the most powerful critics in America at that point because they were so popular, right?
No doubt.
And when they went on their show, when you could only see Hoop Dreams at Sundance, and gave us this really wonderful review, then it was like a sea change for the film and ultimately for us, because it meant that this film was indeed going to have a life beyond 11 o'clock on public television.
Derek Zinnemann's layup pushes Marshall to a 1-point lead. Moments later, a Westinghouse foul, and then a double technical puts Arthur on the line with a chance to ice the victory.
That's a young man named Arthur Agee there at a key moment in a key game in his senior year in high school in a wonderful new documentary named Hoop Dreams. And you may remember that we first talked about this movie way last January on this show. We saw a special preview here in Chicago before it went on to conquer every film festival, Sundance, Toronto, New York, and we reviewed it early because we wanted to say how good it was, to call attention to it.
The reason we wanted to call attention to it is we were hoping it would get a theatrical release, which it is now getting nationwide.
And that's what it deserves. This is an extraordinary film that covers 6 years in the lives of two talented inner-city kids from grade school to the first year in college as they dream of someday becoming basketball stars. As the movie opens, Arthur is being recruited by a Chicago suburban basketball powerhouse, St. Joseph High School.
I can't promise you where you're going to go and if you're going to be a star, but I guarantee that I would help you get into the school that would be best for you.
The other subject of the film is another talented young man, William Gates, who is also recruited by St. Joseph's and gets lots of offers when he becomes a high school All-American.
Any school you name. Dear William, there's gold at the end of the rainbow.
Hoop Hoop Dreams is one of those rare film experiences where you simply forget yourself and sit there totally involved in the incredible drama of what's happening. You may think you don't want to see a film about the inner city or about basketball, or you don't want to see a 3-hour documentary about anything. But please forget those preconceptions. Hoop Dreams is a great film, and you owe it to yourself to see it.
But even then, we didn't anticipate what ultimately became. I mean, if you had asked me if even in those heady times, if you'd asked me that I was going to get a call from Bo Agee, Arthur's dad, one day, all excited, many months later, and say that the President of the United States is on his way to Arkansas State, where Arthur was playing college ball. Mm-hmm. He's on his way to Arkansas State, Clinton, to hang out with Arthur.
Because of the film?
Yeah.
Wow.
and the day he did it was the day of the national championship game that year.
Oh, wow.
And at halftime, they had Clinton on, and they had footage of Arthur and Clinton shooting hoops together. And Bo was of course, Bo was like, he was off the charts, and I, of course, was off the charts. So he told me, and I'll never remember something Bo said to me. He goes, he was so giddy. I never heard Bo so giddy before. And if you've seen the film, Bo disappears from the family for a period of time and comes back, and he has his share of troubles.
I think about it, had I not been on drugs when Arthur went to St. Joseph's, just how good it would have been for him. He wouldn't have had to leave. Here's one of the corners right here, these 4 corners here, where I used to come up here and cop all the time. Threw away a lot of money on these corners, boy. I almost threw my life right along with it.
Bo, at one point on the phone call to me, says, 2 years ago, I was leaping rooftop to rooftop to get away from cops, and this morning, the President of the United States is going to see my son.
Wow, that's amazing.
Wow. I was like, what's next? The Pope?
I mean, Hoop Dreams, it's just the name even became sort of part of the lexicon of America itself.
Yeah,
so
I wish we could have copyrighted that.
You should have. I want to jump forward to 2011 when you released the film The Interrupters, which you made with Alex Kotlowitz, the writer, our mutual friend. And it follows the work of several violence interrupters on the west side of Chicago, and they're working for an organization called Ceasefire. And I'm just wondering how that film originated and how you got into it.
Alex and I had been buddies for a while. When 2009 is when we started that film, and we lived about, he's moved to Chicago now, but for many years he lived in Oak Park, and we lived about 4 blocks apart, and we'd become friends. And I was a big admirer of his writing. He's an incredible writer and thinker. And and he had told me that he was working on an article for the New York Times Magazine about this ceasefire organization, and that he was pretty fascinated with it and enjoying it immensely. And, and then it came out. And at that time, I got the Sunday paper in the mail, and I read the article that Sunday. And I called him up and I said, we had talked about maybe trying to pursue some kind of film together, but it was really more in the scripted realm, because he wanted to try his hand at script writing, and we thought, well, maybe he could write something and I would direct it.
You're talking about a narrative
film, yeah.
Okay.
But I called him up and I said, Alex, this is an incredible article. And he's like, thank you. And I was like, I think we should try to pursue this as a documentary. And he was like, oh man, I don't know. He was like, you don't know how hard it was for me to get access to these interrupter guys. It was not easy. And then a lot of times when they were doing mediations, they told me to, stay this over here in this block.
Right.
And then they would come over and I would quiz them to death, do a reporter's job and just find out exactly what happened. And, so you're reading these accounts of these mediations, but I wasn't able to be at just about any of them, even though it reads that way. And I said, yeah, because you're a really good writer.
Right.
But I said, you know what? Let's look into it, because you've done incredible legwork now in terms of winning the trust of the organization, and guys, you've done a lot of the hard work, and let's just explore it. Let's just check it out, because we don't need endless mediations. We're not doing reality television if we do this,
right?
Which would be endless mediations. We don't have to get endless mediations to tell this story. So let's at least explore it. And so he was game, and we set about exploring it, and they were receptive. And it took a while. We didn't end up following the people he followed, even though we tried in a couple of cases and it didn't work out for various reasons. But we just kind of worked our way in, and the trust that he had built there to begin with was pivotal. And then Zach Piper, again, was the third part of that team. Zach was a producer on it and did sound, and we worked very small. I shot it, and another reason though for me that I wanted to do it took me back to Hoop Dreams, which was at that point in time, both Arthur and William had seen profound loss in their families due to Chicago violence. Arthur's dad had been murdered. Even though they were living in Berwyn at that time, he was murdered by someone that came back from his past in an unfortunate way. And William's brother Curtis was also murdered by someone, I'm not going to get into what I know of the details of it, but he wasn't doing anything illegal at all.
But there's weight on your mind then.
Yeah, and I saw the impact that had on those families, of course. I mean, I felt like to a lesser degree, obviously, I had lost a relative. Yeah. But so all of that was kicking around in my mind, and I was thinking, this violence, I don't know what to do with it. And I read these articles in the paper and see the news, and I just feel helpless about what can we do about the violence in Chicago. And so that was also part of my motivation, which was also part of Alex's initial motivation to even want to write the article, for himself, struggling with those issues.
Right. It's been an issue that he's written about a lot, actually. So
yeah, going back to There Are No Children Here, which is, a classic of nonfiction.
I'd written a story for the New York Times Magazine about this organization, Ceasefire, and I was really drawn not so much to the organization itself, but to some of the people who work there. These men and women who were in their 40s, 50s, some of them in their 30s.
The interrupters.
Right, all formerly of the street, who for one reason or another had the second act in life and were trying to undo some of the damage that they had helped cause when they were younger. And I was telling Steve after the story came out, I said, why don't you come with me to one of these? They would meet every Wednesday, and why don't you come to one of these meetings? You just look in their faces, and you can see the kind of history there, the sort of the pain that they've experienced, and we ended up. Following 3 of the interrupters over the course of 14 months. I mean, the fine line we walked with this film is that we really didn't see it as a film about ceasefire per se, but really sort of we're using these 3 individuals to sort of be our eyes and ears in these communities to help us kind of understand and what was taking place and understand the violence. And it was an extraordinary experience. I mean, we ended up with 3 remarkable people.
Tell us about one of the characters. One of the interrupters is Amina Matthews, who's an incredible character in the film. Charismatic, funny, direct. She's just you can't take your eyes off her.
Amina Matthews' father was one of the biggest gang leaders in the history of Chicago. She gets in where a lot of guys can't get in.
So the life that I lived, being in shootouts, looking at the devil face to face. And I look at my sisters and my brothers today, that was once me.
Yeah, Mina, it remains a very close friend of mine to this day. But it started, obviously, with making that film, and it didn't start well.
No?
No.
Okay.
Amina was someone, there were only 2 women on the Interrupters team, and there were probably 30 guys.
There are times that I can't be there physically with her, but I know that she is fearless and she will lay it on the line, and she'll go up against a lion. Oh! She will just stand up for anyone because of experiences she's had growing up where someone didn't stand up for her.
And she was the only woman, and she was the only practicing Muslim woman. And she was a dynamo, obviously, in the room.
Our mosque is holding a prayer visual for a kid shot sitting in front of his home, just listening to the radio. Corey definitely wasn't in a gang, and he was loved by his block. When rage sets in, when ego sets in, when a Hennessy sets in, I'm gonna walk down here to where Corey's friends are. You stay right here. These young guys say, let's go get who we think did it. I'm hearing 20 different things why that brother got changed. And all of it is stupid. All of it is stupid. 2 o'clock in the afternoon when these babies coming home from school, y'all shooting. For real? This is unacceptable for me to be holding this boy, this young man's obituary. Schools, churches, your mama's house, your cars, those are safe zones. And when I was about your age, I was making some real stupid decisions and some stupid calls that was causing me, my life, blood on my hands, in my head. Stop. Who does this baby belong to? Who does this little shorty belong to? He just hanging around y'all? He just he just hanging around y'all, right? So he see everything that you all do, right? So if this brother right here catch a case and do 100 years, whose fault is it? It's his fault? Teach him righteous. Y'all got it?
Yeah.
Y'all got it?
Yeah.
You got it?
Yeah.
All right. I'm looking to you.
So, and then when I found out that she was Jeff Fort's daughter, Jeff Fort being historically probably the most powerful gang leader, if not certainly in Chicago and maybe anywhere in America, when in his prime, in his in his time, I just thought we've got to follow this woman. She's doing this work. And who she is and everything about her, we've got to follow her. And so Tio Hardiman, who was the head of the Interrupters team, agreed that she'd be great to follow, and he told Amina that she should participate in this, but she didn't want to. She didn't trust us. Because we were basically 3 white guys, and she didn't know me, and she didn't know Alex, and she didn't know Zach, but she did know media. And she knew the way the media liked to look at violence. And we didn't know any of this initially. She just was very elusive. But she did what she was told. She did an interview with us, and she let us in on one mediation. And it was that first mediation where she goes to that group home at night. And we filmed that, and then she said, "I'm done." And I said, "Oh, wait, what do you mean you're done?" She goes, I did it. I gave you an interview, and it was a really good interview. And it was a really good mediation.
Yeah.
And she was like, "I'm done." And I was like, no, we're just getting started, And she started dodging our calls. And I would call her, and she wouldn't answer. And so then Alex tried her one time because he hadn't called her, and she answered. And that was the last time she answered his phone. And she was like, "That was very slick, but that won't work again." And so she was being really elusive. And then, thank God, her husband, the Sheikh, he was, this is where, Bob, I have been so blessed by the documentary gods. He was an ex-basketball player.
Oh, and he knew Hoop Dreams.
He played in college even.
Oh.
And she was probably, I think, complaining about us. She likes to joke about it now that we were stalking her, but we were. We were.
Yeah.
She calls us her stalkers. And she was complaining about us one day to him. And he said, that guy, he made a pretty great documentary on basketball called Hoop Dreams. I think she'd heard of it, but she hadn't seen it.
Yeah.
And he was like, I think you're like being hard here, So she called me up, and that, talk about a surprise.
She called you?
She called me up.
Oh.
I had her phone. I had her cell phone. Mia Matthews popped up. I was like, holy shit, got to answer this, And she goes, hey, I need to see Hoop Dreams. And she goes, and pick another couple films of yours that you think I should see, too.
Right.
Because she'd looked on the internet and seen I'd made other stuff, too.
Right.
So, and she said, and Alex, that book he wrote, I need that.
There Are No Children Here?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I showed her Hoop Dreams, Stevie, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a tough film.
Yeah. And At the Death House Door.
Oh, yeah.
And Alex gave her book. And then, I don't know, a week and a half later, wasn't long, she called me up again. And I think she also had a conversation with Alex as well. She called me up again and she says, okay, I see what you guys are about. I see what you're about. And she goes, you don't have to do the films or write the books that you do. That you could do other stuff, but you've chosen to do stuff, these topics. And Stevie in particular spoke to her. I mean, they all did in a way, but Stevie spoke to her because she's like, who wants to go make a film about a guy like that?
Not exactly a ticket for stardom.
You know what I mean? It's like, but it touched her. And and it's funny, there is a moment in her home, in her house, when we finally got into her house to film, which didn't happen overnight, where you see a copy of Stevie on the table or something. And very astute viewers have noticed it and asked me, like, why does she have a copy of Stevie? And that's the reason. And so she got it. And at that point, she was in. And she was like, and thank God, right? And she said, then she told us what she thought. She said, I thought you guys were just like the rest of the media. I just figured you were looking for some thrilling shit, violence in the city. And I wasn't down with that. I wasn't going to give you that.
Right.
And it took a long time to get her to let us into her home. It became a running joke. It was like, when are we going to get to come to your house and meet your family? And she was like, nope, not ready for that yet. Not ready for that yet. And then finally she did. So it was even though she let us in, obviously you see it in the film, she let us into her work in a very substantial way. Personally, the relationship it was a process, almost a year-long process of the making of the film, that the relationship blossomed to the point where we were in her home and the friendship that now I have with her.
Wow, what a story! People that don't make documentaries, I don't think they understand the sheer persistence required to make these films and to get like Amina Matthews to finally agree to be in your film. It takes a lot of grit and just kind of dogged persistence to get that.
Yeah, we had the same thing with Lori Lightfoot.
Yeah, with your City So Real.
City So Real, like, she fascinated us. And this was before she was even considered to even have a prayer of making the runoff.
She was at 2% at one point.
She was at 2.8% with a month to go.
Right.
For the runoff. So, but we didn't pick candidates purely based on who we thought could win. We did pick those candidates and tried to get access to them and had some access and not some access, but that was okay. Mm-hmm. But we picked Lori because we were just fascinated with her. She, she just seemed like a really interesting person who thought she could be mayor of Chicago. Just like one of the key people we followed significantly was the guy that came in last place, Neil Salas Griffin. And I'm so glad we followed him. His story was great.
Sure.
So
it's a great story.
So with Lori, her press people did not want us to film with her. They kind of did an Amina on us. It's like after me being so persistent, and then we would encounter Lori at public events, and I would go up and say, Lori, we still want to film with you. You know, Lori. She finally, I think, just convinced them to let us film with her just so we'd get off her back. You know what I mean?
I give up.
Yeah, you know, and so we went out for one day with her, and we made it a long day, and we got as much as we could. And then her press person was kind of like, okay, we did that, basically. And I could not get her to arrange for Lori to do stuff with us. So what did we do? We just started showing up because I got the sense that Lori enjoyed the time with us, and she knew my work, and there was some respect there, which was great.
Yeah.
And so we just started showing up, and I would just walk past the press person and go right to Lori and go, hey, Lori, mind if we put a mic on you today? And she'd go, yeah. Sure.
Yeah, she's great in the film. She's so honest. Actually, watching it, I was struck by how little I knew about her because she's very honest in her driving you guys around in her car.
Yeah.
And talking about, quite honestly, about the city and its many problems. And it was.
And she had no entourage.
No entourage. You know, she's driving herself.
She's driving herself, and that wasn't
she's talking
for us.
About
that's what she
picking
did.
Up groceries for her.
Yeah.
For her
wife.
Her wife, right. That's great.
Yeah. That is a case, though, of us, what you're talking about, which is, you can't take no for an answer if you can find a way around no. But you'll never get there unless you win over ultimately the person that you're trying to get to. Even if you have to work around other people that are in your way, they have to want you there, because otherwise you don't have a prayer.
And they also, I think, if they understand the films you've made, it's a significant difference from, being a media organization or somebody out to do a hit job or something, or exploiting a story or a person. It's so different. They have to trust you. And I would think that the body of your work is, in some ways, is helpful in opening those doors. They can see what you've done and the trust you've gained with all these subjects, and the fact that you're not out to make the next hit movie or the next
clearly
hit job. Right. Sorry to tell you, but
oh really, Bob? I thought I was. Thanks for that. Well, no, the thing is that you're right, and Hoop Dreams especially has been a real door opener for films over the years. In fact, if I'm approaching someone and there's resistance and they're kind of like, well, who are you? And if I mention Hoop Dreams and I get a blank stare, then I'm history.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I'm history. It's over.
Right.
It's over. But I don't a lot of times get that, so that's good. But I'll tell you where Hoop Dreams has consistently hurt me over the years, and this will probably surprise you.
Hurt you?
Hurt me. Hurt me with access.
Okay.
Schools.
Oh, because they see the access you had at the school, St. Joseph's.
At St. Joseph's, and even at Marshall. Yeah. Even though I think we present Marshall in a sympathetic light, but it's a look at a poor West Side Chicago public school that's got problems, right?
Yeah, I mean, not everybody's going to look great in those scenes of like the counselor or the
teacher.
And that's interesting that it had that effect on you.
And what's surprising about that is that I did manage to do this 10-part series where we were in a school.
Yeah.
But that never would have America to me never would have happened had I not been a resident of Oak Park for all these years and sent my kids to that school. In other words, if I had walked in there just the director of Hoop Dreams and other films that they may have liked, I think they would have said, no way.
Right.
No way.
Well, I want to get to America to Me, but I want to just talk about two other films before we get to that. Mm-hmm. Roger Ebert obviously was an early champion of Hoop Dreams in your early films, and then you kind of, in a way, turned the tables and you made a film about him called Life Itself, which is a fantastic portrait of Roger in a very vulnerable situation where he was literally dying of cancer. It's not a typical Steve James film because it's a bio, although it has verite footage in it, obviously. But I wonder if you could tell us about that film. Why did you want to make that film, and what was your strategy in making the film?
Yeah, I was approached about that film by the producer for Steve Zaillian, the director and very talented screenwriter in Hollywood. They had read Roger's autobiography, his memoir, Life Itself, and loved it and thought it was a great foundation to do a documentary on Roger. And so they approached me and said, would this be of interest to you? And I hadn't read Roger's memoir at the time. So I said, well, let me, it sounds interesting, but let me read the memoir. Mm-hmm. And, the first I used to know the exact page count, but the first something like 145 pages all take place in Champaign-Urbana of him growing up and going to college.
Right.
And it's interesting, but I remember thinking, my God, this guy remembers too much about his childhood. And I wasn't sold until he got to Chicago. And then when he got to Chicago, for me, the first part of the book is certainly very interesting, but when he gets to Chicago, it just took off. The story, his life, in every way. And by the time I finished that book, I was sold that I would love to do a biography of Roger. And it was driven by a couple of things. One was he had an incredible story that was so unlike what I imagined it would be, and that film critics in general lives are. It was, I always imagine film critics, especially one as prolific as Roger, as having spent way too much time in dark rooms.
Right.
And not enough actually living life. Okay? Right. Nothing could be further from the truth about Roger Ebert. He somehow managed to be in a lot of dark rooms and live the fullest of lives. I was taken with that, And then the other thing was, yes, he had been extremely generous to me as a filmmaker on Hoop Dreams, but also on other films, on Stevie and on The Interrupters, for example. On both those films, he was incredibly generous in his support. And it's not that I felt I owed him that, but I felt like I like this guy, and I like how complicated he is, and I love his spirit.
We all are born with a certain package. We are who we are. Where we were born, who we were born as, how we were raised. We're kind of stuck inside that person. And the purpose of civilization and growth is to be able to reach out and empathize a little bit with other people. And for me, the movies are like a machine that generates empathy. It lets you understand a little bit more about different hopes, aspirations, dreams, and fears. It helps us to identify with the people who are sharing this journey with us.
And the last piece of it was, I wanted to try my hand at a biography. I wanted to do something different. I knew that I would want to do some of what
it's a different kind of a challenge.
It's a different kind of a challenge. And I wanted to try my hand at a biography that's driven much more by interviews and archival, but with the twist that I, of course, couldn't resist, which is to follow him around in the present some, too.
Right, and so he was okay with that. A lot of people would not want to be filmed with that situation, which, he had severe cancer. He looked somewhat deformed, but seemed to be okay with having you film him in all these different situations. It was amazing and quite moving, I think, to follow that part of the story.
Well, again, thank you. Again, the documentary gods smiled on me, because here's a guy who is, literally world famous. Mm-hmm. And powerful still, even though his show had been off the air when we made the film, because on the internet he had really become a force. And yet he insisted on those things. He wanted this to be honest. Mm-hmm. And Chaz, for example, did not want us to see things like the tube going in his neck.
Let's just be clear. Chaz Ebert was Roger's wife.
Yeah, when we had a meeting with them before we began filming, we had a meeting, kind of a pre-pro meeting at the house, and we were talking about shooting coming up and what the plan was. And this was, of course, he hadn't been committed to the hospital yet. He hadn't hurt himself.
Right.
So we had all these plans, and at one point Chaz turned to me and Zach and said, "Can you guys go in the other room for a minute?" And he put, they had a way of communicating non-verbally where she knew exactly what he meant by just his hand gestures and facial expression, right? He did this gesture of like, why? What are you doing? And she goes, "Roger, I feel like we have to do this, and I just don't want them to, I feel like it's private, and it's just not something I feel like they should be here for and see." So we went into his office, but the way their beautiful condo is set up is there's all these glass windows. I could see what was going on.
Right.
And I could see that he was having a vigorous conversation, quote unquote, with her about it while it was going on, while they were doing the suction. And I turned to Zach and I said, we have to get this.
Yeah.
We have to get this. And so the first time it happens in the film, which is quite graphic, she wasn't there. And Roger knew this was the time to do it because he wouldn't have to convince her. And we just did it. And that's why he sent that email afterwards. Like, "I'm so glad we got something today people don't see. Suction."
Right.
That's the kind of subject he was and insisted on being. So, I mean, he's the kind of subject you dream of having. But what comes with that is tremendous responsibility to him, too, And then he died before we finished the film and before he could even see a cut of the film. And so during editing, when David Simpson and I were editing the film, I often thought of Roger sitting on my shoulder, watching what we were doing and saying, "Make it honest. Put that part in there where Marlene, Gene's widow, says that, Roger stole a cab from her when she was 7 months pregnant." I was like, boy, do I really want to put that in there? And I could imagine Roger on my shoulder going, "Yes, put that in there."
Yeah. That was very brave of him to allow that to be filmed.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It was an incredible experience. And Chaz and I didn't know Chaz really at all until I didn't know Roger that well. Every time I saw Roger and Chaz publicly or at a film festival, or I would run up, say hello, and then run off. And Chaz told me when we were making the film, she said, "We thought it was really kind of odd the way you would kind of run up and say hello to us and then run away so quickly. We didn't, because I thought that I wasn't supposed to talk to him because I was a filmmaker and he's a film critic, and I
like a conflict of interest almost.
Yeah, it would make him uncomfortable for me to do that.
I see.
So I would run off, and so I never got to know either of them really until I made this film, and Chaz especially. And I love Chaz, and Chaz and I have become really good friends as a result of this film. And I felt like this is a film that, even though it's different from the others, it also grapples with race in their story.
When he was in the hospital before, we took a semi-not sanctioned trip out of the hospital, bundled him up, and took him to the movies. But I don't think the doctor would let you out. Oops.
Chaz is a strong woman. I'd never met anyone like her.
I think it'll be easier. You can
She is the love of my life.
make sure that you don't get cold.
She saved me from the fate of living out my life alone, which is where I seem to be heading.
The first time he actually saw me was at an AA meeting. And it's the first time I've ever said it publicly. Roger became very public about his. But I felt it was, more private for me. If it doesn't fit, you must have quit. Roger weighed 300 pounds when we first started dating. He didn't care that he was fat. He thought he was great, and that was so sexy. I take it this is not yours?
If my cancer had come and Chaz had not been there with me, I can imagine a descent into lonely decrepitude. That I am still active, going places, moving, is directly because of her. My instinct was to guard myself. I could never again be on television as I once was. She said yes, but people are interested in what you have to say, not in how you say it.
Right, it's a mixed couple, just so people know. Chaz is African American, and it's a mixed race marriage. Earlier in the film, Roger talks about civil rights when he was in college and everything. So it does link in very much into civil rights and race issues as well.
During my years at Illinois, I spent more time working on the Daily Illini than studying. It was in every sense a real newspaper, published 5 days a week on an ancient Goss rotary press that made the building tremble. As editor, I was a case study, tactless, egotistical, merciless, and a showboat.
And he was. But it worked because he could back it up. It was intimidating to the members of the staff because he was like a mature writer at that time. Now here, when those 4 children were killed in the church bombing in Birmingham, there was a huge protest around the country.
400 students gathered on the University Quadrangle to protest the bombing of an Alabama Sunday school.
And Roger was the voice of outrage on this campus. He started out his column by quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, who said to George Wallace, "The blood of these innocent children is on your hands." That ended the quote. Then Roger began his column by saying, "That is not entirely the truth. The blood is on so many hands that history will weep in the telling. And it is not new blood. It is old, very old. And as Lady Macbeth discovered, it will not ever wash away." That began a column written by a 21-year-old guy. And he said it better than anybody said it all week.
Absolutely, because he was active, and he was a white film critic at a time when there were, and there still are, too few critics of color who went out of his way to do his best to help filmmakers of color get their work out there and seen and recognized. Right. You know, he used his power, both he and Gene. Yeah. They used this enormous power that they accumulated for good, which was pretty incredible.
I want to jump a few years forward to Abacus, Small Enough to Jail. It's the incredible story of a small bank in New York called Abacus that became the only, as far as I know, the only institution like that to be criminally indicted after the 2008 mortgage crisis.
Yes.
How did
still true?
Still true, unfortunately. It doesn't seem like a typical Steve James film because most of the events had happened, or a lot of the events had happened in the past. But how did you come to this film?
That was another one that was brought to me. So you're seeing a lot of my best ideas were brought to me.
That's good.
Yeah, works for me. Mark Mitten, who worked with me on Life Itself as a co-producer, and he also was a funder and an executive producer. Mark called me up one day and said that he had this family in New York, the Sungs, that were good friends of his, and that they were going through this they were about to go through a trial that was extraordinary, that they were the only U.S. bank indicted in the wake of the 2008 crisis, and they were a small community bank in Chinatown, and I was like, what? And he said, and he sort of gave me the broad outlines of the story, of how they had discovered some very, very low level fraud internally and reported it, fired people and reported it, did what they thought was all the right things, and got.
They reported it themselves.
They reported it themselves to the federal authorities, to the proper authorities, and even and even sent someone to the police who they didn't realize at the time was a victim of the fraud, but thought was in cahoots with the fraud. So they sent them to the police because they figured if they were in cahoots, they wouldn't go to the police. So they sent them to the police.
Wow.
And were rewarded with being indicted and dragged through a trial that spanned several years from the indictment to completion.
This whole 5-year ordeal began in December of 2009. I had a closing that day involving one of our loan officers, Ken Hughes.
That was Friday. Then on Monday, Ken came in and I fired him that day because he was lying all over the place. Ken Hughes stole money, that he was running a money laundering operation on his own, unbeknownst to everybody here. Obviously committed fraud. I referred the case to our compliance officer, and then we hired an outside consultant, a former federal prosecutor who was highly experienced in fraud and anti-money laundering investigations.
So it was this perfect evidence of a bank finding out something that shouldn't be happening and taking steps to make sure this didn't happen again.
The DA's office started asking us questions. Everybody who asked us for something, we gave them.
We thought we actually went beyond what we were supposed to do. My compliance officer actually put together binders for her staff. And so basically, the beginning of the case was handed to her team in binder form.
You know, at first you think that they're here to figure out what's going on for us because they're law enforcement. I don't know where and at what point we transitioned to...
In their mind, yeah.
In their mind, and then us realizing, wait a minute, you know, maybe we're the target.
And so I was fascinated with the story, but I wasn't sure if there was a film there simply because there was going to be a trial getting underway, but what would we be able to film?
Right.
And so I agreed to go to New York for a few days to shoot with the family, and in the meantime we tried to see about access to the prosecution team. We tried to get access to the courtroom. We tried to get access to the Sung's defense lawyers, and it was no on all three cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oof, you know. And
every door was shut.
Every door was shut except access privately to the Sungs. So I said, you know, let's see. So I figured, you know, I'll spend 3 days in New York. We'll film, and then I'll decide whether I think I want to go further. And I said to Mark, if I don't want to go further, you'll have enough stuff to put a demo together and get somebody else maybe to come in and direct it if you still want to pursue it. He was like, okay, that's it. That's fair enough.
Right.
Fair, good deal. So I went, fell in love with the family and the story, and then I was in and thought, because, you know, I persistent and able to talk people into letting us film, I thought I'll surely be able to talk their lawyers into letting us. You know, lawyers love the camera generally.
Yeah.
You know, surely I'll be able to talk the defense lawyers into this. That'll be no sweat.
Right.
I never did. They they are in the film, but they didn't agree to be interviewed until after the case was done, and so we had to handle it that way. I was pretty confident that the prosecution wouldn't let us in, and that the judge was willing to let us in, but both sets of lawyers would have had to agree, and he would have let us in. He saw the significance of the case and thought it would be important to document. But anyway, we just decided that we could figure out a way to tell this story more intimately through the Sung's experience of the trial. And because they were such an amazing, funny, outspoken family, loving family, you know, I just thought, well, this will have to be enough. And I was intrigued with the idea of doing a courtroom film. You know, I am someone that likes to do different stuff. You know, I'm, you know, if you know my work, I'm known mostly for stuff that's very much grounded in verite and following people around and all that. But I like trying my hand at different kinds of films too. You know, I want to have a broader palette, and it's nice to do different stuff. So that was a film that you know, it's really a legal film.
Sometimes, a lot of times, when you're making your films, you're challenged by a lot of things out of your control, and this seems to be one of them where you couldn't get access to the court or the lawyers. It's kind of inherent in our field. So So how do you deal with that?
You have to keep trying to get the access that you think is important. Don't give up on it. You can't make yourself so obnoxious that you alienate people and hurt yourself. But you have to keep trying, which has paid off for me over the years. But sometimes you don't succeed, and so you have to decide how you're going to tell this story without it. And you know this, Bob, as a filmmaker. A lot of times, not having something spurs you creatively to come up with something that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, that's really makes it different in a good way. And so, for instance, in the case of Abacus, I've seen a lot of courtroom films where they don't have access to the courtroom. That's a pretty common thing to not have. When you have it, it's great, but I've certainly seen plenty of films where the courtroom proceedings are not in the film. And a lot of times the way they're dealt with in films is that, you shoot the empty courtroom.
Right, we've seen that a million times.
Yeah, and shoot it a million different ways. So we did that because I figured we'd need some of that. But then we came up with this idea of hiring this incredible courtroom artist from New York who did all the big trials. And we hired her and said, we want you to basically illustrate the courtroom scenes. And if you look at it with that in mind, she's got all these angles in there that you never see in courtroom art. Your courtroom artist is always seated in one place, looking at the back of heads of lawyers and into the face of the person on the witness stand and looking at the jury box and the judge, and that's it. They don't move around. We have over the shoulder. She storyboarded it basically with guidance from us, and then she did beautiful illustrations, and that became our way to try to bring this to life in a way that we hadn't quite seen. We couldn't afford animation; that would have been another way to go. Yeah. And I'm kind of not big on animation in general. I see it working great. I've seen some entirely animated films that I love. Like Waltz with Bashar. That's an amazing film, but I've seen a lot of animation in otherwise regular documentaries, and I'm kind of like, maybe. I liked the idea of stills and drawings, for me anyway, in this film much better.
Did the DA, Cyrus Vance Jr., or Polly Greenberg, did they ever see the film, and do you know what their thoughts are?
They must have seen it at this point, but they've never publicly spoken about it that I know of.
At what point did you decide to give the film a kind of a broader context with regard to the big banks, to their nefarious behavior, to work in that larger story? Was that always going to be part of your strategy, or did it kind of evolve?
It was part of the initial strategy, but only to do it in the most economical way possible, so that we could provide the needed context for what was going on here, but not get buried in the story of 2008 and the big banks. And one of the challenges was, how do we do that? When we first started cutting it, and this film was edited by David Simpson and John Farbrother. I was not an editor on this film, which is why it's so short and was more successful, I guess. But
why it got nominated for an Academy Award?
Yeah, probably. At first, this was before John had entered the picture, David was cutting those sections, and he was raiding the internet for all the usual stuff, the ticker tapes and the bull on Wall Street and all the stuff you see, and whenever they talk about financial world and stock market crashes and all that kind of stuff.
Right, the iconic images.
The iconic images ripped from news shows and the like.
Right.
And we looked at it and we were just like, first of all, we don't want to do this. This is boring. We've seen this a million times. It makes it feel like it's a TV show. And secondly, it just seemed like it was way too much for what we wanted to accomplish. And so we landed on this idea of just shooting the edifices of these banks, because to us, they stood for their power and influence in America in a way that we found much more interesting than all of that other stuff. And that also then freed us, or forced us, if you will, to really make it as economical as possible, because you can't do that forever.
Right.
And so we did. And so that was a key. And I think the other big decision in this film was trying to get the prosecution's voice into the film, to get Polly Greenberg and Cyrus Vance Jr. into the film. Mm-hmm. And from the get-go, we wanted that, and we were clear with the Sungs that we were going to do everything in our power to articulate the case against them from the people who were making the case against them.
Right.
And it's to their credit that they went along with us making this film, not knowing the outcome of the trial, because they felt so clearly innocent that they felt that they could stand the scrutiny from the other side, both in the trial and in the film. And so it took a while to get that. And Cyrus Vance was the last piece of that puzzle. We interviewed the New Yorker reporter who had done a piece in the New Yorker on the trial that we heard the prosecution thought was fair.
Right.
So we interviewed her first. Then we went to Polly Greenberg, who had left the office. And we told her about the interview with the New Yorker person, and that it was vitally important to us to get their side in the story. So she agreed. She was free now to talk to us. We tried so many people in the office that were there at the time and got shut out completely. And then once we had Greenberg, once we had the New Yorker, then we got the juror that was one of the holdouts.
Right.
And we took all of that to Cyrus Vance and said, look, we're serious about this.
Yeah. Don't you want to have your side represented, basically?
And so he agreed to like a 20-minute interview that turned into a 45-minute interview.
Right.
And he's regretted it ever since, I'm sure.
I want to finish up this great podcast with the series you did more recently. It's a 10-part series called America to Me, and it follows a whole year at Oak Park River Forest High School, where, as you said, your own kids went to school and you lived there. Just describe to us how difficult it was. It seemed like it would have been difficult to get, first of all, just to get into that school and get permission, because the film has seemingly amazing access. It seems like the cameras are everywhere all the time. How did you achieve that?
Well, you know, Bob, that one of the tasks of good editing is to make the viewer think that they are not missing anything important.
Right.
Right?
Of course.
So
you weren't supposed to tell that secret.
That's right. So we had a tremendous team on this series, first and foremost. This is a series where I am really the lead director, but I had 3 other, what we ended up, for Directors Guild of America reasons, having to call story directors or segment directors. Is that, I can't remember. They segment directors. I wanted to call them story directors, and they wouldn't let me.
Right.
You know, Rebecca Parrish, Kevin Shaw, and Bing Liu, who also made Minding the Gap, that came out the same year.
Right, amazing film.
Which may have been the best standalone feature doc of the year, in my humble opinion.
I agree.
So we had this incredible team of filmmakers, which did allow us, once we had access, to be a lot of places at once. And follow a lot of threads. And then we had this incredible edit team. David Simpson again, Leslie Simmer, who's worked with me also in the past. I was also a primary editor once shooting ended. And then we had also Elena Schmelter and Ruben Daniels, who also did some incredible editing, in addition to their roles, more support-based roles. So this was a monstrous undertaking. And the way in which we got the access was in part due to the fact that I was a longtime resident. We had a producer, John Conney, who was a teacher there, and he's the one. This is something. America to Me is a. Well, it's going to be a film initially, of course, and then look what it turned into. But
10 shows.
Yeah, it's something again that I'd wanted to do for years, but thought would never be possible because having lived in Oak Park all those years, I knew how protective Oak Park is of its reputation as this sort of place of great racial harmony and liberalism.
Right.
And I knew, having lived there all these years, that the rhetoric exceeded the reality. And I knew that in the school, I felt the school was a perfect window into that, as well as a window into larger issues about education and race and disparities for the country. Because I've seen a lot of films, very good films over the years, about race and education in poor public schools, in besieged communities, and in fact in Hoop Dreams, Marshall is such a school.
Right.
But I hadn't seen a film that went into a suburban interracial school where there were none of the usual obstacles to achievement for kids of color, being lack of resources, violence, seemingly no will to make change. None of that applied to Oak Park.
Right.
So I thought, what better place to really grapple with education in America in a different way and at a fundamental level that eliminates the obvious causes, which are true causes, and digs down deeper into even deeper causes or other causes at the very least. So I made my big pitch. John Conney, the teacher who was a producer, told me that he thought that the school board would be receptive, and that I said, there's no way to make this film because the school will never let us in. And he said, it's not up to the school, it's up to the school board. And he said, I think that if we talk to school board members, they just might be willing to do it because so many of them run for the school board on equity issues and wanting to make Oak Park school system more equitable and to eliminate these disparities. And so and he was right. And so we set about meeting with different members of the school board individually, and then we presented to the school board. And of course, as expected, the principal and the superintendent of the school came out publicly against allowing us in, and the school board bravely overrode them and allowed us in. And so we were in the school, but of course we had to deal with the administration daily throughout the entire year, and that was the biggest stressful challenge I've experienced as a filmmaker.
Really?
In terms of dealing with subjects.
Yeah.
That was, we could do a whole other podcast on this series and what that was like, but the great thing is that we found what we thought were incredible kids and families and teachers, and that opened themselves to us. There were many teachers that did not want to have anything to do with this film. There were, there were many places where the answer was no, but there were many, many places where people got what we were doing, thought what we were doing was of great value, and welcomed us in bravely. And that's the series we made. And I also, as you've seen, because you've seen the series, we decided to foreground the lack of cooperation from the administration because neither the principal or superintendent ever agreed to be interviewed.
Right, you state that in the film, at the beginning of the film.
We stated at the beginning, and we come back to it.
Which is smart because it's a settled issue then.
It's a settled issue, but it also was revealing, too.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because they're in the film whether they want to be or not, because they couldn't keep us out of school board meetings and public school events.
Right.
They could only keep us out of private meetings that they were involved with and, declined to be interviewed. And believe me, I tried to convince them both repeatedly that it was in their best interest to participate, which it was.
Oh yeah.
So I'm actually happy to say that the series led very directly to, I think it's inarguable that the series led very directly to that superintendent and that principal are no longer at Oak Park River Forest High School.
Oh, neither one of them.
Neither one of them.
Interesting.
I think that's a good thing. It's not that I think they're bad people. They're not.
Yeah.
They're well-meaning people and they're smart people, but they were not good leaders for that school, and there needed to be change. And the series helped considerably to make that change. And Oak Park River Forest High School is still wrestling with and struggling with these issues, but I think it's doing it more openly. At least I hope it's doing it more openly.
I mean, it's a remarkable series, partly due to the amazing characters in the film, the students, the teachers, the parents. Just to pick out a couple, and they're all great. There's a teacher named Jessica Stovall, who's a mixed race woman from. There's an interesting backstory because she is from a white town in Wisconsin, and she faced a certain amount of taunting and racism as she was growing up. And at one point you go back, you kind of leave the realm of the school, which is the main part of the story, but you go back to her hometown in this white kind of idyllic town in Wisconsin and tell her story of her mixed race family. And then what's interesting to me is you have a fantastic transition then from going back to Wisconsin and dealing with some of her backstory and what she faced as a kid, what her father faced when he was growing up in the projects in St. Louis. And then you have to get back to the school, though. And I just wanted to have you talk about the idea of transitions, because I always find them to be very difficult in a documentary to make, to connect things together. But this is just one of many examples of just fantastic transition that seems organic, yet it is quite a leap in some ways.
I never thought I would be in a position in which I'm just surviving, and that I'd have some of the same feelings teaching at OPRF that I had growing up in Wisconsin. It was white. It was as white as you could get in small town USA. We were the only African-American family. That was the longest trip ever. I know. I felt it too. Your hair is so short.
I know, right? So are you feeling burnt out?
The kids are wonderful. It's the school that doesn't support me. My dad is a professor of psychology. And my mom has been a third grade teacher for now 37 years. Growing up in that small town, there were racial incidents, like getting called nigger in the locker room. But for the most part, it wasn't something that we addressed. No, it will be okay, but just to my mom, she's so wanting the world to be a better place that it's just painful for her to hear those things.
I know that there were some issues, some troubles, like on the school bus and things like that that were not good, but hopefully we dealt with them as we went.
Beautiful morning, though.
Oh my gosh, it's the best. My dad grew up in the projects of St. Louis, actually Pruitt-Igoe, one of the most notorious projects in the U.S.
It's been quite the journey. I think the hardest part was just feeling unsafe all the time. You'd be walking and then somebody would just run past you and they'd have a gun in their hand. Yeah.
One day, I was in 4th grade.
And I'm going to get on the other side of you.
I found a spot about halfway down the bus and kind of sunk down in the seat because I wanted to eat these Hershey chocolate kisses and I didn't want to have to share them with anybody. This girl came forward with 2 boys and proceeded to say a series of things about you're having too much chocolate, you're turning black, and, you know, how does it feel to be a nigger? But the thing that really stuck with me, she says an incredibly devastating comment that I obtained my black skin from a sexual relationship with my father. I remember like throwing up in my mouth a bit and like she saw my visceral reaction and then continued laughing and then they got up and left. And I got off the bus and my dad was there. He knew something was wrong because I was hysterical and I was so humiliated and ashamed. For many years, I never told him. I wanted to be strong. I wanted them to be proud of me. As I went to college, I really wanted to have a Black community. I'd grown up culturally white. I spoke in standard English. I carried myself in a way considered to be white. For me, I have to code switch to the Black community, right? And even to this day, I have trouble navigating this. So for most of our students that are Black, one of the challenges is teaching that their racial and cultural backgrounds are beautiful, that they are just as valuable, but that they have to code switch so that they are seen as equal, that they are seen as intelligent. It's a little bit of teaching them how to play the game.
I wonder if you could just talk about that.
Yeah, I thank you for that, and the edit team thanks you for that. When we went in to edit this series, both David and Leslie had both worked with me on The New Americans, which was at that time the last docuseries that I had done, the first and last, which was
This is a series about immigrants in America.
Yeah, that we had done years earlier, and that was a incredible challenge to us editorially to interweave 5 different stories, 5 different families that don't know each other and don't live in the same place. In the course of a series, it was a challenge we welcomed, but it was a big challenge. I thought America to me was going to be kind of a piece of cake in that regard, because it all takes place in the same school.
Right.
And they're all students at the same school, and some of them even know each other.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is going to be easy to structure because, it's like we don't have to deal with any of that stuff we did on The New Americans. And it turned out to be, I mean, you can ask the other editors what they think. I think it turned out to be 3 times as difficult. And it's because we were in the same school and there were infinite possibilities of how we could go together, but we had to find ways to balance classroom and after school and trips home and
the sports
teams and cheerleading squads and so, and we had to honor the unfolding time period of a school year.
Of the school year, right.
We're locked into in many ways to a chronology. And it's a mini-series, and so, we want to leave you at the end of the episode. If not, we don't have cliffhangers in that crime mini-series way.
No, but there are things at the end of each show that are kind of akin to a cliffhanger. It makes you go, oh, I gotta figure, what's going to happen next.
Our version, anyway. And so, and we knew that my one idea going into the editing that stuck throughout was, I thought it was important to have some kind of anchor big scene in each episode.
Right.
Whether it was the first football game or homecoming or prom or a big basketball
spoken word
game.
stuff.
Yes, spoken word. And that ended up being a good idea to build. It wasn't that we necessarily build a whole episode around that, but we had culminations that I think each episode could build to in some ways. And so the example you're talking about is another one of those examples of trying to figure out, we kept trying to figure out where Jess's backstory home should go.
Right.
And we were locked into the fact that we shot it in the spring when it was spring and early, as summer was coming on and it was warm out.
Yeah.
So there was only one of 2 choices. We could either put it at the end of the year or we could put it at the beginning of the year.
Right.
We couldn't go back in the middle of winter.
Middle of winter, right.
Or fall. And we really debated about where that would help us best for a long time. And it moved around, and we debated about how much of it we would do. There were versions of that scene back in Wisconsin that were much fuller and still interesting, where you got to meet the brothers more. And you got more of a sense of the family and the community. But then it just sort of, it hit us where it needed to go, because we felt like it had so much to say about who Jess was as a character that would inform so much of what you would subsequently come to know about her as she struggled in the school, that we said, okay, we figured out where we think it needs to go, and then it was like, okay, how do we get back?
That was why I was so intrigued by. How did you get back to
this
the
is
school?
Just my long way around to answer your question, because this is the way I do. I ramble. And we, I think it was Leslie, pretty sure it was Leslie's brilliant concept to come back the way we did. And we when we were there, we had shot these pictures on their wall of their family.
Of Jessica's family, yeah.
Jessica's both sides of her family.
Right.
And so I had shot those when I was in Wisconsin, and then Leslie kind of came up with this idea to kind of use that, and with Jess talking in voiceover about racial identity and having to wear, the ways in which Black kids have to live in different spaces in different ways. And she was
right, she calls it code switching.
Code switching, right. And she was applying it to her own life. And then Leslie just came up with this kind of brilliant transition back to the hallways of Oak Park and the kids who are living with that today and having to do that. And, there was a day that me and Kevin Shaw, who was one of the directors, who all the directors shot as well. And
Right.
Kevin Shaw has a brilliant eye, just a brilliant eye. We had spent one whole day just shooting the school cafeteria and hallways and kids at lockers and every conceivable thing. Mm-hmm. And it was actually relatively late. It was during editing that we went to do this, because we realized that we needed more of that, even though we'd shot a fair amount of it. So we spent an entire day at the school doing that and shooting some slow-mo and all that stuff. And all of that really came in handy and gave the editors, a much larger palette to work with for sequences such as the one you're describing.
It was great. One other thing I wanted to mention about the film, what partly gives it some momentum are these kind of big events, the sports stuff and the spoken word, Louder Than a Bomb and all that. But when I was watching there's one whole sequence about a football game, Friday night football game. And at first you think it's just, it's a portrait of any school in America, Friday night football. But you start to realize that it itself is a commentary on the racial issues that are out front. I believe there's a mostly black girls cheerleading squad, and then there's a mostly white drill team, and the placement of those two is an indication, or is in a way a racist sort of placement. And also then you hear the opposing players talking about the black players on Oak Park's team.
We are one of the few teams in our conference that has a high percentage of black athletes. We don't play a whole lot of teams that look like us. And when we step on the football field, race is present.
Good luck, coach. Have fun. These guys, their football team's predominantly white. Good luck, guys. Have fun out there. Good luck. They've had some...
There's always just less than favorable words on the football field that are just kind of slung around loosely.
Play within the rules. Play smart. Ignore anything they have to say to you. Hey, don't get into it with them. They're going to do that shit all night. Don't get into it.
Just pokes with the N-word and just stuff like that. Just kind of like comes out where...
Hey, boy, you dropped the ball,
yeah,
boy.
Stuff like that.
Just trying to get a rise out of people. Hey, come on. Get your little ass over here. I have sat next to parents.
Oh, man.
Who say some really frightening things, like, take out that nigger's knees. Just frightening,
Just like
frightening
unreal, like from a movie scene, things you see in movies where it's like,
it can't be
what's
real.
I've run the gamut of yelling about it to sending an email to another coach. You know, a lot of the natural reactions, a defensiveness or a denial. No, that didn't happen. Or, well, maybe it happened, but your kid said this.
Let's not just look at blue. Let's look at both teams.
I had a conversation with an official once. We had a lot of penalties, and the team that we were playing had very few. And I asked, what can I do? And he said, well, there's really not much you can do. You got a really good ball team. Your team just plays so aggressively. And, you know, I just got stuck on the word. My team was aggressive. Like, first of all, it's football, and that's kind of what it's supposed to be. But it sounded like there was something else behind the choice of that coded language.
That wasn't a late hit in the end zone. He was 7 yards in the end zone, and he got shoved out. You didn't see it? He got shoved down right in front of you. You missed it. They saw the holding, but you missed the unsportsmanlike conduct right in front of you in the end zone.
And you start to realize that it's not quite what it seems originally. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yes, that game, that Hinsdale Central game, was interesting because for me, it goes all the way back to when my oldest son was in the marching band back in 2002, so almost 15 years earlier. And we used to go to the games to watch them play the first half so we could watch the marching band play in the second half because Oak Park's team was frequently so bad that it was worth leaving at halftime. Anyway, I noticed then that the cheerleading squad for Oak Park was all black and that the drill team squad was all white. And I remember at the time thinking, why is that? That is so bizarre because even in my high school where the football and basketball teams were overwhelmingly black, the cheerleading squad was overwhelmingly white. And so I was wondering what's going on in the culture here at the school that this is the way it works out here. And I was frankly surprised to come back, 15 years later when we went to that very first football game. But I was kind of amazed when we went to the first football game that plays in episode 1 and you see not only is the cheerleading squad all black, but the drill squad is just about still all white. And the black cheerleaders were performing down at the end of the stadium where all the black people sit, and all the white people at the other end, including most of the white student body. So it was just this incredibly racial division. And then we had also heard going into that game that Hinsdale Central, along with a few other still all-white schools in that West Suburban Conference, that there was a history of racial taunting, that the black kids on Oak Park's team often were called the N-word or slaves or go back to slavery. And I was just kind of, I felt really naive about that. I didn't think that was still going on a sports field. Not in this day and age, but it is and was. And so going into that game, to film that game, it became clearly more than just the reason was to film a football game. We'd already filmed a football game, the first game of the season. So the only reason to go back to the football game in the series was, in fact, to dig into the kind of racial dynamics and contradictions that were going on in that setting. And so that's what that's about. It's actually ended up being, the documentary gods smiling on us yet again, in that, Hinsdale Central was a powerhouse team that was supposed to beat Oak Park, and yet Oak Park killed them in this game. And there's something very sweet and redeeming about Oak Park's victory there in light of all this racism. It's a case where the good guys win.
As you say somewhat modestly, you've often been blessed by the documentary gods, but we know, of course, there's so much more than that. After all these years, Steve, of making documentaries, what's your biggest takeaway, do you think?
One of my favorite Q&A moments in all the years of doing films took place with The Interrupters years ago, almost 10 years ago now. It was at some festival, and the screening had ended, and we were starting the Q&A, and I see this guy sitting up in the back, and he's got his hand raised high, and he's giving me this really skeptical look. So, I eventually called on him, because you got to do it. And he goes, so, Steve, you directed this? And I was like, yeah, I'm the director. And he goes, well, it's a documentary, so tell me, what does a director even do? Don't you just show up and film everything? And, everyone laughed, or a few people gasped, I guess. And I said, you're right. It's the biggest scam going. But of course, it's not true. And I think one of the themes that has emerged from this conversation with you, Bob, and you know this as well as I do from your long years of making documentaries, is that, the coin of the realm in documentary is access. It's gaining access to things, to people, to situations that most of us can't or haven't had, and providing that window into that world. But making documentaries is also very much about what do you do when you don't get the access that you want. Because sometimes you're pretty fortunate in that regard and you get tremendous access. And then there are times, and I've certainly experienced it, and I'm sure you have too, where the access is very much limited. And it doesn't mean that you don't keep trying to get it throughout the process and trying to win over those people. So much of making a documentary is about convincing people to let you do what you want to do. So you keep doing that, but at the same time, it's also very much about what do you do when you don't get the access? How do you work around it? How do you shoot around it? How do you cut around it and still tell the story, and hopefully tell the story in a compelling and honest way? And I think that's the thing that you learn to navigate more and more as the years go by. You learn how to convince people. And, I've said this often, I think in our world, unlike in narrative feature world, directors and filmmakers can kind of be jerks and still be successful, very successful, It's a different beast. In our world, most of the best directors I know are really good with people. They're good with people because they have to engage people, and people have to want them around in order for them to do what they want to do. And so, my shorthand of that is, if you want to be a good documentary filmmaker, don't be an asshole.
Great words of wisdom to close out the show. Steve James, I want to thank you for sharing your stories and reflections about your amazing career. Thanks for coming on.
This has been a real pleasure. I've greatly enjoyed talking to you.
Since recording this podcast, Steve announced that his newest series, Chicago City So Real, has been sold to National Geographic and will air this fall. Thanks for listening. This is Bob Hercules for Rhythm of Life.
Join us next time when I sit down with legendary actor Ernie Hudson to discuss his long and winding career. We talk about his time at the Yale School of Drama, his breakout role in the Ghostbusters, to finding projects that challenge him as an actor. The longevity of his career is remarkable, having appeared with Leonardo DiCaprio in The Basketball Diaries, played the warden in the HBO series Oz, appeared in Grace and Frankie with Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda, as well as appearing on Ballers with Dwayne Johnson. Hudson has been a fixture of American culture in film and television for decades, and we are excited to have him on the show. Be sure to subscribe to Rhythm of Life, leave us a rating and review so more people can find out about the show, and like us on Facebook. I'm Steve Ordauer.
This has been a Rhythm and Light production.